Hello, everyone. If you're joining us from the previous session, we are glad to have you back. Again, my name is Kristen Valencia, and I'm your host and moderator for CloudCheckr's Reclaim Your Cloud virtual event. Welcome back to Service Provider Day. A couple of reminders before we jump in. You can anonymously ask questions if you're watching live. We'll have some time to get to them during our Q&A at the end. Your screen is also customizable, so you can resize the widgets and play around with your arrangement as you see fit. At the end of this live webcast, you'll also get a prompt to enter the next roundtable. You won't want to miss that as well. If you're here on demand, you can just look for the prompt as a static button on the side of your console. Again, please feel free to poke around. We've got some great resources here. Don't forget to grab your pair of socks and connect with these guys on LinkedIn. So let's jump in. The title for this session is Embrace Your Public Cloud Growth Spurt and Manage Security at Scale. I'd like to start things off with a brief introduction of our speakers here. Eric, would you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know your fun facts look a little bit different than they did last year.
Yeah, I suppose they do. My pandemic project was raising a child. My son is now about 8 months old. Also have a dog, and like everybody else, I spent the rest of the pandemic figuring out just what it was like to go 6 months without a haircut and spend way too much time cooking.
And Gary, how about yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon. So my name is Gary Derheim. I'm the Vice President of Managed Services and Marketing for PTP. We're a cloud consulting firm based out of Boston. So fun facts for me, I had the unfortunate event of dislocating and breaking a hip at age 35, but what that did get me was to be featured on a commercial and a bunch of billboards around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So that's like my 15 minutes of fame when people would tell me, oh, I was watching TV and all of a sudden I heard your voice. For those of anybody that's interested in cycling, I race on a master cycling team as a Cat 2 cyclist. So for me, my release from some of these, every day of online events is getting out on the bike and getting to just get that mental release. But have 3 beautiful daughters and a wife and love to get out to Colorado and ski and hike and just enjoy the outdoors.
That's really the key, right? All about the balance.
You bet.
So we're so glad to have both of you here. I just want to really set the stage going back to our initial slide here. This year's obviously been challenging for many reasons. In business, service providers have seen huge shifts in the way that they're growing or stalling with their customers or products. Gary, can you tell us a little bit about what you've seen from a customer growth perspective over 2020?
Yeah, you bet. So, it's interesting, if you look throughout history and there's been, significant changes in economics or technology or just innovation that have had, big disruptions to the industry. And what created pain for some organizations created a tremendous amount of opportunity for others. And so I think really what we saw here, both for a company like us and our customers, was those organizations that, because of their approach and their infrastructure, who were really prepared to succeed in this new world that we were in this, distributed workforce, remote world, were able to capitalize on a lot of that opportunity. And for other organizations that were less prepared, either heavily reliant on brick and mortar or their, technology infrastructure did not allow them to make the transition very effectively, or frankly, just their customer base couldn't engage with them as effectively, they saw, significant challenges. So, for a company like us that is, cloud-driven, cloud-enabled between SaaS applications and public cloud applications with the right level of access to users, we were able to take a 25-person managed services organization and shift them out of the office to working home seamlessly without any effect to overall security. And so for organizations like that, that's where we were really able to see, growth and progression. And so for our customers, a lot of them are in the Boston area in biotechnology and pursuing treatments, and we're able to pursue their business just as effectively in this new model as they were before. So, just for some organizations, it was an opportunity to capitalize on market, and then for others, obviously, it was a little challenging.
And that's huge because their demand for their own products is going up and down at a really unpredictable pace over the last 12, 16 months. So that's definitely huge. So Gary, how can service providers really manage their customers' rapid growth while also ensuring that security through the avenues like discipline, oversight, risk awareness?
Right. So the security piece obviously is critical, and trying to just shepherd that through. We see it really as trying to accelerate our customers. The speed of IT for the business, but trying to apply the appropriate guardrails and controls to try and find that happy medium. So, I think really the first part is really trying to identify risk for a particular organization. So when you're engaging with them, it's what's the environment, what's the makeup, how are they distributed, what are their opportunities for risk, what type of business are they in, or are there compliance issues, et cetera, and trying to measure the controls that you would put in place with the risk of the organization, because not all organizations are going to certainly be the same. And so, a CFO is going to look at how can I spend the least amount of money possible for an acceptable amount of risk or security. And that's really the balance that I think that we're trying to help organizations find. The other area I would say is trying to establish a framework. So there are a number of security frameworks out in the market. You've got SANS, you've got the NIST frameworks, you've got very specific compliance frameworks like HIPAA or PCI, but trying to establish kind of a standardization for a framework that provides a little bit of a roadmap, right? So that you're not just looking at security from a product perspective, because costs end up being high. The length of time to deploy gets to be high, and you're not necessarily solving the problems that have the greatest opportunity. And really, then it comes down to prioritization, and there's a lot of things that you could be doing. What has the biggest impact back to the business? So again, allowing people to experience rapid growth and have that business agility with the right amount of controls for the time. And then, kind of the last key point is just the ability to automate, high repetition events. And so security in particular, like when we're looking at risk and we're looking at analyzing risk and, monitoring and measuring security, whether it's in a cloud or, infrastructure at the endpoint, those are some high volume activities. And so the ability to provide some automation there, which is, available and can be configured, is a way to help drive down cost and meet the needs of the organization while allowing them to move fast. So I think really those elements, risk, frameworks, prioritization, and then automation would be the areas I'd recommend.
Sure. And Gary, you're talking a lot about opportunities for risk. Eric, what we know, being in the cloud industry, we know about the shared responsibility model. How might that impact your opportunities for risk or affecting security?
I think it definitely sort of puts a clear target on what the actual risks are. So, I mean, if we, as kind of a necessary concept born out of the concept of renting somebody else's computing infrastructure, is I don't have any control over the security of the infrastructure itself, but the provider then puts the entirety of the security of what I actually put on there in my hands. And that's not to say that they completely leave you out to dry. There are native tools that can help with that. And tools like CloudCheckr can help with that. But the risk really is in the people actually interacting with my architecture, the people that are deploying it, the people that are maintaining it, and their ability to use the provider tools to secure it most effectively, as usual, I'd say the biggest risk tends to be lack of preparedness, tends to be ignorance about how to use the tools, and ultimately not surrounding yourself with both people and technology that support strong security practices at scale.
Yeah, and we can dive deeper into that. Gary, how would you say native tools and cloud management platforms, for example, kind of play a role in managing that security at scale, not pitting them against each other, but really how an MSP can use them both to their full benefit?
Yeah, and this is, like I said, it's like technology evolves over the years, and I've had the opportunity to be operating managed services for 20 years. So things have changed significantly from that point, like in the early 2000s till now. But this concept of native tools versus aggregation type tools has not, because when you think about disparate technologies and the ability to have, you've got to apply, vendors have got to provide management tools for individual technologies, but that becomes very inefficient for a service provider and even a larger organization to be able to deal with. You get into tool sprawl. And then from a workflow perspective, you don't want an analyst or an engineer logging into 5 or 10 or 15 different platforms. So in some cases, the native tools provide some really good data, but they're very narrow in their aspect, and the impact to the organization needs to be broader. And so you can think about that maybe from like a multi-cloud perspective. So organizations that are in multiple clouds have the opportunity to use a cloud management platform that gives them data in one single interface to both. In other ways, the cloud management tools provide a better or more impactful view or way to kind of digest the data or present that back to the customer, because the native tools are built more specifically just for management. So, I think about it from like if, for an example, like with IoT devices in your house, if you've got a different solution for, cameras, and then you've got, appliances in the house, and you've got something for lights, and from an individual perspective, like, wow, it'd be great if I had one platform, if Nest could take all of those things and pull them into one sort of interface, because I've got different vendors. So it's the same thing here, I think, when we're addressing oversight and security and control and management is, how efficient can I make my organization? How much better data can I provide them? And so in a lot of cases, the cloud management platform is extracting data from those native tools. So that's good. Like an API connection to gather data from those tools is fantastic, but just presenting it in a way that has a bigger impact, and then also making the speed of delivery and the effectiveness of delivery for IT operations just more efficient. And so I think they're both necessary for different functions, but day in, day out, the aggregation piece provides a lot more efficiency, and that's really where it comes into play from an MSP perspective.
Right, and from an API, when we're talking about APIs and digesting data, Eric, you can talk a little bit more about the process, especially from a CloudCheckr perspective, of going in and starting to use that data to help enterprises benefit from their MSPs. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that core concept, I think, is what supports such a rich ecosystem of companies like us and service providers, all of the different vendors that interact with and help to drive comfort with the use of public cloud, and the concepts that Gary is hitting on here, the ability to automate data collection, the ability to present it back in a targeted way, ultimately I think becomes most useful when it's paired with trust relationships that exist between customers and service providers like Pinnacle, and so. CloudCheckr, I think, and other tools like it, I think their core value is the ability to basically be set up once, interact with, ingest raw data sets and outputs from native tools that may not be super digestible on their own, may be a little bit cumbersome, may just need a little bit of formatting and routing help. Something like CloudCheckr, making sure that the actual the data points that are important are getting to the right people at the right times. But CloudCheckr has a pretty low technical investment. I think we see that an awful lot. Things that really don't require a ton of additional infrastructure to manage, but can still provide a lot of value in automating the collection of data, storing data, putting intelligent querying UIs or alerting tools in front of it, rule sets in front of it, all the things that can really help organizations standardize and weaponize data to make them the best cloud users that they can be, and service providers being able to take those tools, put them in the hands of their customers, sometimes even build services around them, or assist with implementation and ongoing management. Those are really, really valuable. They're valuable services to be able to provide.
Yeah, and circling back on our theme, Gary, how can cloud security and risk management really play a role in overall business ROI for both the service provider and the customer?
Yeah, that's a great point. And so, thinking about, so ROI is always an interesting one when it comes into a conversation of security, and try to, the decision of how do you get a return on investment for something that's supposed to protect versus necessarily drive the business. And so when we talk about like an ROI for our customers, I think I mentioned when we were talking about the last question, but the conversation that you're going to have with a CFO is going to be entirely different than the conversation that you're going to have with a security lead or a CISO or a VP of security infrastructure at an organization, because by definition, the security individual wants the maximum amount of security for their organization, because that's their job. Their job is to protect. And so, if they're breached, it's on them. Conversely, the CFO is looking for the least amount of security that provides a certain threshold of, because you can always spend more. So what's the right amount? And so I think trying to really help them navigate those waters is critical. And so that's where, the conversation really around assessments and, risk awareness and understanding the opportunity for loss and what that is, either from business downtime or from, the effect on the brand, or from, personal identifiable information that may be in their environment. Obviously different organizations are going to have different levels of risk there. From a service provider perspective, we've got a great opportunity to return the investment for delivering security services for the companies that we're part of. But I would just kind of urge the individuals that, the attendees that are here, is to do it with consideration for, targeting the greatest amount of value back to your customers. And so one of the things that we're seeing today is, because a lot of organizations now have a very smaller organizations or growing organizations have a very light footprint from an infrastructure level, but they've got users that are all over the place, and they're accessing data either in the cloud or they're accessing data in SaaS applications. And so, being able to lock down that endpoint and visibility from a security standpoint, horizontally versus vertically or north-south in the organization, is becoming critical. So looking at it, looking at things from a different way, but not forgetting about the fundamentals. So policy is still critical in helping organizations, especially younger organizations that haven't gone through the process. There's an opportunity to help your customers, new organizations, build policy, and then they can kind of translate that policy into security products. The other things, like, you don't hear as much about in the market because they're not new tools, but vulnerability management. When you look at breaches, password, either, passwords that are lost or compromised, or vulnerable software that hasn't been patched still remains the highest percentage of breach inside the environment. So while we're talking about a lot of new technologies and security, not forgetting those fundamental elements. And then the last thing I just say is with cloud, especially for the companies that we're working with, the platform, the CloudCheckr platform that we leverage allows the data scientists to be able to do what they need to do in the business, and so drive their business, but gives us the oversight into when we need to make recommendations for them to secure the environment. And so that becomes an ROI on both parts, really. ROI for the customer because they can keep moving fast because they know that we're watching their infrastructure, and then obviously an ROI for us because we're adding value to the organization, and that's something that our customers are willing to pay for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it really does. I mean, it ties into my world even when it comes to branding, marketing. It's hard to put dollar amounts on some of those things: downtime, risk, trust, partnership. But it always comes back. You do see it come back to you as an organization. So I want to remind everybody right now listening, there's still some time to do a Q&A. So keep asking those questions, and we're actually going to dive right into the Q&A. So Gary, I wanted to ask you first, and Eric, you can jump in, but this question came in: what do you think is the biggest threat to customer security in the cloud? And I would say, in other words, maybe what makes their data most vulnerable?
Yeah, and I can start with that, and then I know Eric's got a lot of input there as well from what he does all day, every day. But back to we think that cloud is such a great opportunity because we think it accelerates business. So, if I go back 10 or 15 years ago, delivering managed services, and companies are spending months and months and months building out data center and racking servers and doing all these things that, the business isn't moving faster because of that. It's just taking them longer to deploy applications that will drive the business. And so that's where the speed of the cloud really helps companies get to their goals faster. So with DevOps teams or data scientists, or you've got people that are specialized on the data side, and they're able to deploy environments in the cloud, to deliver what they need back from an analysis or research perspective. And that's great. With a credit card, you can go deploy these services, but typically these users are not security experts. And so I think that's the greatest opportunity, is the ability to deploy and put volumes of what's probably sensitive IP, intellectual property, to an organization in the cloud that may not have the oversight, the governance, the security structure that matches the policy of the business. And so trying to marry those two things together and provide the visibility to that, so that the team that's really driving the business can go fast, but that there's tools and there's process and there's oversight for identifying where you've got critical vulnerabilities or configurations that could open up opportunities for breach. And so those are services that a service provider can provide. Those are obviously capabilities that CloudCheckr has in a lot of areas. But I think that's it, is just the fact that there are people that can go deploy services and put data into the cloud without really the controls that there used to be in more of a private cloud or an on-prem type environment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you can list off things that are largely symptomatic, improper configuration of identity and access management, like poor use of networking infrastructure, unfamiliarity with object storage policies and storage in general. But all of that, I think, is, like I said, those are symptomatic, and the root cause of that largely is the difficulties with applying and enforcing policy and governance. The folks that we see struggle with this stuff are the ones that are, that we have to use that whole Wild West term on, and they've got developers in the console that are aggressively growing and building out whatever their IP is. But if there isn't some kind of standardization and there isn't some kind of like applied visibility to what's out there and how it's being deployed, it may sound like too much of a technical investment to to build processes around that, but I think it's really the only way forward.
All right, thanks, Eric. So Gary, I want to toss back to you. I know because you're passionate about policy and compliance. They're asking, are there compliance standards that you see as nice to haves, but encourage customers to measure anyway?
Yeah, so I mean, my passion about compliance frameworks. I'd say I have a passion in cycling. I like frameworks. How's that? Nobody loves an audit as much as me. No, I think there's a lot there, and so again, I like to discuss the NIST framework. There's 5 fundamental elements of NIST: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and then there's all sorts of controls that fit underneath like that NIST 853. So there's a lot there for organizations to digest. And to try to kind of favor, hey, which is, one's, better versus the other, I probably come back to some of the things that we've discussed before, but a lot of it is in, access management, I think, especially when we're talking in the cloud, and really the lockdown, that whole, the concept of least privilege for users is critical, and establishing, roles and users and only providing, individual users the right level of access and ensuring they're doing things like leveraging multi-factor authentication or using single sign-on to protect that identity and give them access. I think those are the things, again, in the cloud that allow, I know the users that can do certain things and I can protect myself from others. And I feel like that, outside of building policy, which I think is something that larger companies obviously are robust in being able to build out policy, but there's a lot of younger, more immature organizations that are deficient there, that they just go start deploying security products, but they do it without a real framework. And so I think those kind of things, identity and access management and controlling that and moving that to a least privilege. And then, the policy build, because once you go through the policy build, then everything kind of funnels through there. Those are the things I think that really come to mind.
And I think if NIST even feels like too much, then at least start with CIS. They write specific documentation for AWS and Azure that like clearly lays out the things that you should do. Organizationally, obviously you should be thinking towards something more comprehensive than that. But for the folks that are really early on, there are resources out there that'll help build the building blocks for public cloud security policy.
Sure. Thank you, Eric and Gary. Actually, we are already out of time. I have so much more to ask. I have a million other questions that I could add on here. But I'd like to offer a huge thank you to Gary Derheim from PTP, Eric Morrissey from CloudCheckr for sharing their expertise and spending some time with us. Coming up next, grab a little refresher, take a breath, meet us back here in 5. Our next 2 speakers will be delivering tips for reducing customer overhead with cloud automation. So just make sure you click through the prompt that will pop up here in a moment. If you're watching on demand, it'll be a static button on the side of your console here. So Gary, any final thoughts before we head out here?
No, it was a great discussion. Security and agility and just the opportunity to help customers move faster, but do it with control is conversations that we're having every day. And I think that there's a great opportunity for the service provider partners that are on here today. So I appreciate you having me. It was a really enjoyable conversation.
And Eric, any final thoughts?
No, just thanks for having me. Thanks again to Gary for enriching this significantly. Nobody would have wanted to listen to me talk for a whole half an hour. But yeah, thanks for having us, and Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks again, everyone out there for watching. We'll see you in the next session.
Take care.